Today we will be interviewing Faye Satterley, who is the Cancer Services Director. And my tour this weekend, and I will start off by saying we are being recorded for a nurse leadership class. My task this week was to identify a servant leader, a leader who I admire and who has attributes of someone that I would want to be like. Therefore, I am in Faye Satterley's office, where I will ask her a few questions. First, to identify servant leadership. Servant leadership is basically I make it simple and say it's being a leader like Christ. Just as he led other people and he encouraged and empowered, and he never was rushed, and he was, even though we get all caught up in the fast-pacedness, you always seem to have a demeanor that lets everything be calm. So the first thing is, what do you think you do in a leadership role that empowers others?
Well, I like to give clear direction and then get out of the way. I do trust that we have, I think one of the most important things you can do is hire well, to really look at the folks that you're bringing in and do your best job in assessing whether they come in with the attributes that you're looking for, and then get out of their way. Give them clear direction and allow them to get to the place you want to go. It's not so important that you give people the details of how they have to do every little thing. What's important to me is that we all arrive in the same place. And so how people choose to get there is okay. They can get there a little differently, as long as we're all arriving in the same place, getting to the patient safety, getting to having good customer service, having people get what they need and get out of the hospital in a timely way. How that nurse gets there is up to her.
Now, what are your personal leadership strengths?
Probably probably my best strength is having a good 30,000-foot view. I can see the big picture really well. So even though I don't get caught in the details, I can see the big picture well enough to stay calm usually.
Do you allow for other staff members to meet their full potential? And if so, how do you accomplish this?
Well, certainly that's the ideal. That's what I would strive for. I think that if you were to look at the unit that you work on, for instance, I think that there's lots of people who have really just risen to the top, just as leaders, as being able to express the great qualities that they have, and they're all different. And the really cool thing about that unit, for instance, is that there's all these different people with different qualities, but because they all work together as a team, it makes this beautiful music. So I think that, go back to tell me what this question was.
Do you allow other staff members to meet their full potential? If so, how do you accomplish this?
So I think part of it is getting out of their way. I think part of it is being clear in your directive and then getting out of their way. But I think another thing is to try to get people the education they need. And that's a challenge. That is challenging. We have an excellent education department, so I think that really helps. But I like to get people out to conferences and get away from the building to get another perspective on how things could work, and to encourage them going back to school.
Stepping away from it, do you think that with the focus on going back to school and more of the people, it seems like, are taking that chance and going back, do you see a difference in the nurses? I know personally when I was told about going back to school, thought that would be not something I would be interested in. But I've been amazed at the things that I've learned, and I wondered if watching other people, because there's several that have been, especially in our unit, that have completed their classes, have you been able to see a difference at the education?
I think you definitely see a difference. And when I went to Piedmont, originally and came out of school in 1984. And at the time, when I looked around and saw nurses coming out of school, I thought that the nurses that were the best on the unit, the quickest, were those who came from the associate degree program. Seemed like they had a lot more work done in the practical day-to-day work, and they seemed to have a much better grasp of the actual shift work of the unit. So I really liked those nurses, and I definitely had a bias in that direction. And I managed to move up in the organization. In fact, I already was a director, and I was still only an associate's degree nurse. And I felt like, you know, there's no reason why you couldn't just be an associate's degree, and I didn't see anything wrong with that. And then I was writing a book about nursing and why there was a shortage, and this was in 2002 and 2003 that I was working on the book. And as I started looking at nursing as a profession, what I saw was that there were way too many ways to enter nursing, and that in alone gave a different feel to the profession, so that people didn't see nursing in as much a professional way as they looked at physical therapy or pharmacy. And I thought that that was wrong, because what nurses have to do every day is that front line, making sure people are safe and that they get well. And I thought, you know, I think we really have to change the focus. We needed to make it only one entry, only one way into the profession, and that needs to be the highest possible level of education. So as soon as I got done with the book, I went back to school, because I started thinking this is much more valuable than it appears. And what I found for myself was that it definitely broadened my view. It broadened my scope, and you think that that's not going to be true because you're adding a bunch of non-clinical classes. So you think, oh, how is that? What's that really going to do? But what it does is change your focus. It broadens your view. It gives you a much better perspective. And I think that that has enhanced nursing overall in this institution. If you look at us, Martha Jefferson nurses, compared to other nurses in other hospitals, I start to look around and go, wow, what a sophisticated, professional, questioning, just an extraordinary group of people. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we have really pushed folks and scholarship folks to get their education. So that's a long way of saying, yes, I do think it's made a big difference.
How do you handle suggestions and feedback when you're negotiating changes and improvements?
I try as hard as I can to listen, to really listen, because I find that you come into any situation, and no matter what you think in your head, that you have already jumped to the answer. You have already decided how it really should happen. And I think the older I get, the easier it is for that to happen. And I have to really stop and listen and see that people have some really good ideas and really good suggestions, and probably the route that I was thinking was not the way to get there after all. So it's just listening. I think listening is probably the best quality you can have as a leader. Listening and encouraging.
Would you describe yourself as a servant leader?
As I understand it, I suppose so. I always thought that, it's funny when you're young and you think about what a leader is. I got a leader confused with someone who had a position of power. I mean, you just think of when you're young and you don't really understand definitions, leader is the person who's in power. But what I realized is that you're much better off if you are giving all the power to the people around you and you are at the bottom helping them, raise them up, as opposed to being at the top giving directions. So if that fits the definition of servant leader, then yes.
I think that you've answered most of my questions. Thank you for taking the time to help me with my class and teaching me about servant leadership and demonstrating everything that I hope to strive to be one day.
Patty, thank you. Thank you honestly for being such a good nurse and doing such a good job. I'm impressed, and I think that being in school has really changed some of your outlook too.